Hello and welcome to the To Be Like Christ Bible Study podcast, where we explore and explain one chapter of the Bible at a time. My name is Luke and I am your host. And today's chapter is Genesis 32. Let's read the text together. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version. And while I find it in my Bible, if you have a moment, hit the subscribe button on your podcast player so we can study together again sometime. Genesis 32 has conveniently 32 verses. Let's go ahead and read the chapter. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of the place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I might find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers and the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Pass on ahead of me, and put a space between drove and drove." He instructed the first, "When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, 'To whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you?' Then you shall say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover, he is behind us.' He likewise instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, 'Moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us.' For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterwards I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me." So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. So that is the text of Genesis chapter 32. We see Jacob preparing to meet his brother Esau, who he hasn't seen in 20 years, and who was trying to murder him when he last saw him. But he's making preparations for that meeting, but it doesn't happen yet here in 32. We're going to have to wait for that and to see how he's received by his brother. Let's remind ourselves of at least one chapter of context before we jump into 32 to remind ourselves of where we are. In the last chapter, chapter 31, Jacob decided to leave Laban's house. He had been up there for 20 years in Haran, but he decides to leave. But his relationship with Laban had gone sour, and it wasn't very good, so he leaves secretly. He takes all of his wives, his children, his livestock, his servants down on his way back to Canaan, to his father's house. And he leaves. Laban doesn't know about it for 3 days, but then Laban finds out about it and he pursues Jacob. And Laban's really mad at Jacob for leaving the way that he did. But Jacob tells him that he did that because Laban hadn't been honest with him. Laban hadn't treated him well. And he was worried that Laban wasn't going to let him leave, or that he was going to try to take Jacob's wives, his daughters, Laban's daughters, away from him to keep him from leaving, or, send him away without them. And so he says, that's why I left secretly. Laban accuses him of stealing his household gods, and Rachel hides them from Laban so he's not able to find them. And then Jacob kind of airs his grievances with Laban. He says, you've ripped me off all these years. You've changed my wages 10 times. You've cheated me. And all I've ever done is be good to you. In the end, they decide that they're just going to make a peace treaty, kind of put all those things aside and just agree that they're going to go back to their respective homes, Laban to Haran, Jacob to Canaan, and agree that they're not going to do anyone any harm in the future. So that's what they do. And at the end of chapter 31, we see Laban, after making this peace treaty, returning to Haran. So the trouble of Laban is behind Jacob, but now ahead of him is his rocky relationship with his brother Esau. So he's preparing for the meeting that he maybe knew had to happen all along. God is with him. God is the one who instructed him to come back to Canaan. So he has that on his side, but he doesn't know exactly what the future holds. So we see him preparing his people, his camp, his possessions for this meeting with Esau, and he's a little bit concerned when he hears Esau's initial response to his message that he's returning home, and he splits his camp into 2 different groups in case he gets attacked by Esau. But let's talk about that more when we get to our outline section. Let's now go to our PDF. Let's answer our first initial foundational questions of when these events happen, who are our main characters, and where they happen. So if you want the PDF, you can download it for free on our website at tobelikechrist.com. You can also buy a book on Amazon that has all 50 chapters of the book of Genesis. There are links down in the description. So first of all, when did these events happen on our historical timeline? The exact date of Jacob's return to Canaan isn't known with precision, but using information that we have throughout the book of Genesis, it seems likely that it occurred between 1745 and 1721 BC. For our main characters today, we have Jacob. First of all, he is the son of Isaac and Rebekah, and the twin sister, the twin, I'm sure Esau called him his twin sister once or twice in his life, but he's the twin brother of Esau. He's the youngest of those two. We have Esau, who's Jacob's brother, who he hasn't seen now in 20 years. Last time we saw Esau, he was planning to kill Jacob for stealing his blessing. And then we have this kind of mysterious individual. We'll just call him the wrestling man for the time being, and we'll discuss his identity further in the outline. Jacob wrestles with this mysterious man near the ford of Jabbok as he's preparing to meet with Esau. In terms of our map, which you can get on the PDF if you download it, we still have that expanded view of the Mediterranean region because Jacob is making a trip from Haran to Canaan. Haran's about 500 miles to the north of Canaan. So he's concluding that trip now as we get to chapter 32. Jacob lived up in Haran for 20 years before he returned to Canaan in chapters 31 through 33. Jacob wrestles with this mysterious man in a place called Penuel, near the ford of Jabbok. Okay, so with those 3 things out of the way, let's now go ahead and get into our text, make sure we understand what we just read. This is a really interesting chapter. I am going to do my best just to kind of stick to the facts in our outline today. There, especially in our second section, there is a lot of varying interpretations and some, what's the word that I'm looking for, speculation about the text and suggestions of things meaning certain things, even though they're not specifically stated in the text. And so I'm just going to do my best to stick to the facts. And if you want to dig into some of these interpretations of what we're going to read about, you can do that in your spare time, but we're just going to try to stick with what the Bible tells us and what we can know for sure from chapter 32. Okay, we've got 32 verses total, and I want to tackle the first 21 in our first section, entitled, Jacob Prepares to Meet Esau After 20 Years Apart. After making this treaty with Laban, Jacob prepares to reunite with his brother, and as we've mentioned several times, and hopefully you've listened to the study on chapter 27, Jacob left Canaan on bad terms with his brother. So he now fears how Esau might respond to seeing him again. He didn't have email, he didn't have phone, he wasn't texting his brother, even though he's 500 miles apart. That would be easy for us today, but it doesn't seem like he's had any communication with his brother for 20 years. So he has no idea the man that he's going to meet and what his temperament towards him is going to be. Different times, for sure. Jacob sent messengers to Esau, and the messengers come back and they say, Esau is coming to meet you, and he's coming with 400 men. And so Jacob's like, I don't know how to take that. Why would he be coming to meet me with 400 men? It could be that he's intending to use these 400 men to wipe me off the face of the earth. It's interesting to me that Esau doesn't send any other communication to communicate his temperament towards Jacob. I don't know if maybe he just wanted him to sweat it. That would be like a very brotherly thing to do. I'm just going to make him sweat this one out for, a couple more days until I show him my true intentions. If my younger brother did that to me, I might do the same thing. But that's, speaking of speculation that I wasn't going to get into, that would be it. Jacob feared that Esau might attack him, and so he split his family into two groups, thinking that, well, if one was attacked, at least the other one would survive. I mean, that would be better than losing everybody, I guess. And so this is his plan. Jacob then prays to the Lord, and we see the changing character in Jacob in this prayer, the change of character from the time of his youth to the man that he's become and that God has shaped him into over these past 20 years. He says to the Lord, I'm not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant, or shown to me. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps of people. So he says, I don't deserve the goodness that God has given to me over all these years. He recognizes that. And thanking God for his past care of him, he then asks the Lord to protect him as he meets his brother. He says to the Lord, you promised that you would bring me down to Canaan and do good to me. And so I would like for that to be the case rather than my brother attacking me and wiping out my whole family or potentially half of my family. So he's praying that this meeting is going to go well. And he also recognizes that he doesn't deserve any blessing from God. Maybe he recognizes that he doesn't necessarily deserve this meeting to go well. He may look back at what he did to Esau and think, that wasn't the best. I probably shouldn't have been lying to my father. I probably shouldn't have been deceiving him. And so this grace that God has given me over all these years, I don't deserve it, but I'm still asking the Lord for his blessing. And when you think about our situation, we're really in the same situation. We don't deserve the good things that God has given to us. We can probably all look back at our past and recognize things that weren't so great, things that we shouldn't have done, things that God maybe ought to punish us for. And to look at God then and say, thank you for your grace for not doing that, and thank you for all the blessings that you've given me in spite of my badness, my sinfulness. And then we also pray that, God would continue to bless us into the future, but with a recognition that I don't deserve it. I'm just praying to God because he's so good. And that's Jacob's situation here. He's asking God to bless this meeting. Presents were then sent ahead of Jacob to be given to Esau as he approached, and this is quite a significant present. He gives him 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels. Has anyone ever drank camel milk? I'd just be curious down in the comments section. I personally have not. And I'm not sure that I want to. But when we lived in North Africa, I did hear about that, and people drink camel milk. So I'd be interested to know if anyone has tried it. 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. And Jacob told his servants to refer to him as the servant of Esau when they delivered this gift. It's really interesting. He uses the terminology of my lord Esau. I am your servant, Jacob. obviously taking a humble posture. But it's also interesting because we know that based on God's promises and based on the blessing that Isaac gave to Jacob, that indeed in the eyes of God, Jacob is not the servant of Esau. Jacob is the Lord of Esau. He is superior to Esau. That was basically the exact words of Isaac's blessing, that Esau and Jacob's other brothers were going to be his servants. So this is the setup for the meeting between Jacob and Esau. We won't get to the meeting until later chapters. There's this interesting intermission, this interesting detail that's here, and that takes us into section number 2, Jacob wrestles with God, verses 22 through 32. Jacob goes ahead and he sends his wives and his children ahead of him while he remains alone for the night. And that night, we're told that a man came and wrestled with Jacob until the break of day. And the man was not prevailing over Jacob during this wrestling match. It seems like they were somewhat evenly matched, the text says. And so the mysterious man touches Jacob's hip socket and puts it out of joint, which I assume would kind of give him the victory in the competition. Jacob's not going to be able to do much if his hip is out of joint. That pretty much incapacitates you. But Jacob refuses to let go of the other man. The man says to him that the sun is coming up. Let me find that verse. It says in verse 26, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he's not going to let him go until he receives a blessing from this mysterious man. And it seems here Jacob may have known a little bit about the identity of this mysterious man, as this wrestling match has been going on for quite some time, it seems like, all night. So the blessing, part of the blessing that he gives to him is that the mysterious man says, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel." So he gives him a new name. "For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." If you miss some of the details of this study, that's fine, but please don't miss this one because it's key to understanding how the people of God in the Old Testament get their name, right? We have a changing of Jacob's name from Jacob to Israel. And this is the name that the nation that is going to grow out of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob's descendants is going to be called by. They're going to be known as Israel, or the children of Israel, or the nation of Israel. And that name comes from this event. And what we find out is that this mysterious man is not really just a man. It's actually God. And while I don't know that we can know this for sure, many people suggest that this is the second person of the Godhead. This is Jesus coming in the form of a man, and he is the one who blesses Jacob with this new name. We know that this is God from what Jacob says later on after this wrestling match is over. It says that Jacob named the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." So as I mentioned, there's a lot of speculation around this text, speculation into some of the statements that are made, interpretive work that's going on here, people suggesting there's deeper meanings to some of the things here. And I don't want to get into all of that for our study because this is a more basic study. I think more of an introduction to the text and to the larger story of the book of Genesis. Again, if you have time, you can dig into some of the specifics on some of the statements that are made and the way that things are play out in this wrestling match, and the mystery of this man just kind of appearing out of nowhere, and the blessings that are given. But I'll let you get into that in your own personal study. But this is a really incredible event in Jacob's life. So if you have your Bible in front of you, or maybe you can go back and do this later, it might be worth highlighting or underlining or circling verse 28 and just making a note for yourself and remind yourself so you can find it later as to this is where the name Israel comes from. This is why this nation is called by this name. It's because of the blessing that's given to Jacob. Because we're going to be referring to that name Israel like forever, for many, many more pages throughout the entire Bible, really. So as we finish out chapter 32, we do have an interesting detail that's given to us at the end of the text, and that is that due to his hip being put out of joint by the Lord, Jacob now walks with a limp. And I just realized in my outline that I missed this really interesting detail that also appears in verses 1 through 2 of this chapter. So all the way back up at the beginning, it says, when Jacob arrives at this place where he makes his camp, the angels of the Lord meet him there. So there's already some kind of like supernatural, spiritual activity that's going on in this place where Jacob is deciding to make his camp. And so when this man comes and wrestles him, it's just kind of a continuation of that supernatural activity that's already going on. Supernatural, that might not be the word. Spiritual, we'll say spiritual. And it's interesting too that when Jacob left on this journey to go to Haran, and he had that vision, there were the angels coming up and down the ladder, back and forth from heaven to earth. And now here, as he's returning and kind of in the general area, he is now seeing these angels again, accompanying him, working out the providence and the will of God on earth. So I think that will do it for our study of Genesis 32, or our summary of Genesis 32 today. Let's finish up our study with an application. Our application comes back to this idea of speculation. Don't get caught up speculating about details in the Bible and miss the most important information that God is sharing with us. If you're like me, you probably have a lot of questions about this mysterious wrestling match between God and Jacob. Why did God want to wrestle? Why does he manifest himself in this way? Why doesn't God just beat him outright in 2 seconds? We all know that he had the power to do that. Why did the wrestling match need to end when the sun was coming up? All of these are fair questions, and I think they're worth thinking about, but don't miss the key details that are easily understood from this text. Don't focus on the difficult stuff and miss the stuff that God gives us to be understood. God blessed Jacob by changing his name to Israel. And this is hugely important because it explains how Jacob's descendants, who we will read about through the rest of the Bible, become known as the Israelites. It's not wrong to ponder the mysteries of the Bible, but don't spend all of your time thinking about the details that we aren't given to the neglect of the details that we are given. If we never find out why God chose to bless Jacob through a wrestling match, that'll be okay. If we don't understand where the name Israel comes from and who it refers to and how it links back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then we're going to have a lot of problems understanding the Bible. So take the key details here and let's make sure that we absorb the clear stuff that God has given us before moving on to some of the more foggy details. And I think maybe this is the second time, now that I think about it, that we've had an application like this. I think when we were talking about the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6 and some of the other details there, and talking about the pre-flood world and all the interesting things that seem to happen there, we talked about speculating and how we can get caught up in that and caught up in all of this stuff that God has left a mystery, and sometimes miss the stuff that he wants to communicate to us clearly. So just something to keep in mind, and a reminder again here in Genesis chapter 32. So thank you for studying with me today. Lord willing, we'll be back in chapter 33, and we'll be talking soon about this meeting between Jacob and Esau and how it goes and what happens between these two brothers. So until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day, and Lord willing, I will talk to you again soon.